Hi, everyone, and welcome to Behind the Numbers. My name is Dave Bookbinder, and welcome to the show where we dig deeper to understand what really matters most in business. One of the topics that I am regularly talking to my clients about, business owners and entrepreneurs, is the exit process. When should they do it? What does it involve? And today I'm pleased to welcome a guest who's going to help to clarify a lot of those confusing issues for our business owners out there. Pleased to welcome Sean Sands, who's Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at Haefele Flanagan. Sean, welcome to Behind the Numbers.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Great to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience briefly, and then we'll jump into the conversation.
Sure. So when I think about my career, it's really evolved around M&A from three different perspectives. Early in my career, I was with a bank, a large bank, and a lot of it I was in the loan syndications group. And a lot of the deals that we were financing were for mergers and acquisitions. And I really found those deals to be the most interesting. So I did that for several years, financing those deals. And I really decided I wanted to be an advisor because I interacted with a lot of the bankers and thought it was very interesting. I got that opportunity and I joined a big four accounting firm in their corporate finance group and started working with entrepreneurs and companies to help them buy companies and sell companies. Um, I ended up moving over to a publicly traded company, but I spent about 17 years working on M&A and primarily sell side, although I also did do some buy side work. About 2009, the market was a little bit rough, and I actually switched to the corporate side. And for the corporation, I had three responsibilities: strategy, capital allocation, but also M&A, working with the corporate development team and making acquisitions. So I've really seen M&A from three different perspectives during the course of my career. And now I've come back to the entrepreneurial side and I'm working at Haefele, and it's been great.
Awesome. It's great. Well, let's tap into the various perspectives and lenses that you bring to the table. And let me start it off by talking about something that I think business owners are hearing very often about thinking about selling basically the day they start their business, right? As soon as they launch, the exit has to be in their mind somewhere on the horizon. When should business owners actually begin thinking about selling the business?
Do you know, I think it's always good to start early. So if somebody's in a business and they're looking at it as an opportunity and their ultimate goal is liquidity, you're probably thinking about it right away. Other people, I think that doesn't enter their mind. They have a startup and they're trying to ramp and so forth. And they might not think about it until they start to think about retirement or there are other triggers. Maybe there's a health concern, there's no succession planning, there's no one to take over the business. So I think it's really situational. But the one thing I would say is you're better off thinking about it early and starting to plan early because that always ends up with the best result.
Yeah, that's the one thing I always tell my clients. Same thing that I advise them that the exit is, well, there is a transaction, an event. The exit really is a process, and there's a process of getting, we'll call it sale ready. Um, Talk a little bit about what it means to get ready for sale.
Yeah, so getting ready for sale, there's a long list, and that's why it's really good to start early. But I think the first thing you think about is the financial cleanup, right? You have to take a look at your financials. Hopefully, your company's on an upswing, so there's that company timing. Is it the right time for the company? Is the market performing well? But you want to look at your financials. You want to make sure that all your accounting is locked down, that you're following all the right accounting procedures. You want to think about working capital and making sure that's clean and efficient and that you don't have excess working capital in the company. You want to think about legal issues. Do you have any outstanding litigation that you would want to clean up? Are there HR issues? So you really want to put the company forward as a really clean company with no issues, no red flags that somebody would be concerned about. But there's other things to think about too. There's compliance issues. You need to think about those. You need to think about social media nowadays, right? The reputational side of things. What are your former employees saying? What are your employees saying? What are
Mhm.
your customers saying? You want to be aware of that and know what's out there. One thing that's really, really important is to work with your tax advisor, whether that's your accounting firm or your legal, whoever you're using. And one thing you want to agree to up front is what is the most efficient tax structure to move forward with, and you want to pass that along to your banker or your broker so he can position you for that type of transaction. That you don't want that to be an afterthought, something that happens later on in the process. So those are some of the things to think about.
Yeah, interesting. So the way I analogize it is if you're going to put your house on the market, you want to make sure that the carpets are new and the paint is fresh, get it sale ready. What about those circumstances where somebody has an unfortunate instance where maybe they're not choosing to go to market on their own terms? Maybe there's been a fallout with a partner, maybe there's been a death in the family, illness, something like that that triggers a sale before someone intended to do it. How do they rationalize that?
Well, I mean, in a perfect world, that's obviously not a great way to go to market, right? Out of desperation. A lot of times I'll talk to owners and conditions will be great and there'll be a lot of active activity in the industry, and I'll be meeting with them on a regular basis talking about readiness. And that, a lot of times when their company's performing great, they say, why would I sell my company now? Everything's great. But then what happens is down the road we enter into a recession. They're a lower middle market company, they lose their largest customer, and then they turn around, they say, hey, do you know
Yeah.
what, I'd love to sell now, but they want the valuation that we were talking about when market conditions were good and before they lost that major customer that might represent 20% of their revenue. So the one thing I would say is that if you do have health issues, I think you need to be ready. You need to think about that, right? That your sale readiness should be at top of mind if you have some issues. Let's face it, being an entrepreneur is a very stressful job, right? So I think you need to think about those things. And in a perfect world, you really want to time the deal out based upon, is it a good time for the company? Is it a good time for me? Am I feeling good? Am I ready to do this? Because it's a 10-month process, right? You don't want to, say, you don't want to be in a really bad way and have the company under a lot of stress. I'd say another thing you need to think about is, if you're in the middle of a large project like an IT situation with the company, that's not an ideal time to go, right? So are market conditions good? Are things good with the company? Is the sale readiness? Are you ready to go from that perspective? And then is the owner emotionally ready? Or the timing that you need to think about um, in a perfect world?
Yeah, lots to unpack there. Somebody once told me you may not be for sale, but you can always be bought. So make sure that you are ready if somebody actually approaches you. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. But you referred to timing and process. Talk a little bit about what's involved when you're bringing a client to market for sale.
So, there's a couple of different stages. The first stage is due diligence, right? You need to meet with the client. You have to talk about value expectations, right? You don't want to go to market and not prepare them as to, hey, what I think your company is worth, what a transaction might look like. Will it have an earnout? Will it be stock, cash? You have to have all those conversations up front, because if you don't, you could have a situation where both parties are very unhappy at the end. The investment banker thinks he did a great job, he's got a good valuation, but it doesn't meet the expectations of the owner. So the first thing I think you want to do is do some due diligence, talk about valuation, find out what their objectives are up front, and whether you can meet those objectives, because you don't want to be disappointed on the back end. Once you've determined that and everyone still wants to move forward to market, then you enter that preparation where you get all the materials ready. And you want all the materials ready, from preparing a teaser to the SIM, the confidential information memorandum that you're going to put out to people. You put together a buyer's list, and you get all these things ready to go. And then you're ready for the next stage, which is the marketing stage, where you're actually reaching out to people, having them sign NDAs after they take a look at that teaser and they express interest, and getting those SIMs out. Um, then you ask for indications of interest, and you get back the indications of interest. You talk with your owner. You talk about what makes sense, what the group looks like, and you invite those people into management meetings. And after the management meetings, you ask them for LOIs, and then it's more of a binding type agreement. Although there's always outs, it's much more serious than the indication of interest. And at that point, you go through a bidding process with the final bidders, trying to maximize value as best you can. And then if there's an LOI that's acceptable, then you enter the closing phase, right? Where now you start to think about documents. There's a period of time where you're going to be exclusive with that particular buyer, and you try and close a transaction.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I know a number of clients that I've spoken to recently have been approached over the years by people in their industry. They know one another, um, and they think that when it's time to sell, or maybe if they get that offer, that maybe their best course of action is just negotiate it themselves because they already know the participants. And many times there's a lot of power in that auction, like when a potential buyer sees that confidential information memorandum and in the lower right hand corner it says number 17, for example, and now they know that other potential buyers have seen it, and maybe they're going to sharpen their pencil just a little bit more. What's your take on the, call it, the direct approach vis-a-vis the auction?
It's a great question because a lot of people receive unsolicited offers and they start to go down that course. I do think there's a lot of benefits of running an auction process. And the most important one is competitive tension, right? That makes people do things that they don't want to do and pay more than they would like to pay because they feel like, hey, this asset's not going to be available if I don't move on it now. So I think there's a lot of benefits. Studies have shown that the incremental purchase price is somewhere in the range of 10 to 30%, depending upon what study you're taking a look at. I think the probability of close is also significantly higher. But I think the deal that you get across the board is better, right? You get better terms, you get maybe an easier earnout if an earnout is a part of things. Um, but getting back to another issue that you brought up, Dave, was should I be represented, right? I think there's a lot of advantages of having a professional help you, whether it's an investment banker or broker, to help you through the process. And one of the most important things is to serve as a buffer, right? And to have those tougher conversations because you're going to
Yeah.
be with these people for a period of time. And you want to make sure that you maintain really good relations with them. But I do think that investment bankers, this is what we do day in and day out. And they've handled a lot of transactions and they just know how to maximize value, get the best terms, and create that competitive tension. So I think there's nothing wrong with sometimes owners. Hey, I'd love to know what my company's worth. I'm not serious about selling now, but maybe I'll talk to one player and just find out what they'll do for me. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but if you're really serious about selling, I would highly recommend an auction.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. In my former investment banking days, I saw the power of the auction tremendously. Uh, and talk about going at your own. At one point earlier in my life, I thought I was smart enough to sell my own house. And sure, why not? And put it on the market myself, and the whole for sale by owner thing, trying to save the commission. And realized after I got into it that, man, I was way out over my skis, and hire a professional to do the job. I want to shift back
Absolutely.
to something you alluded to before, and it was the mental aspect. And anybody who's out there and consulting and working with clients, there's a mental component and psychological component where you're oftentimes acting as your client's therapist. One of the things I hear a lot is that the thing that holds entrepreneurs back from actually exiting the business is the mindset, and underpinning that is really the, what am I going to do next? Right? You hear all the time, my spouse doesn't want me at home. Don't play golf. I'm not going to sail around the world. What would I do? Um, what do you hear? What's holding entrepreneurs back from exiting when ideally the market conditions are right or their business circumstances right?
I think you raised a good point. A lot of if you're an entrepreneur, you spend a lot of time on your company, right? And it takes a lot of work to build a company into a situation where it's a valuable asset. You've got a great management team and people, somebody's willing to buy it. So it's been your focus. So I do think that that's valid. What am I going to do with my time and so forth? I think a bigger issue that I see a lot is the emotional side, and it's not so much as what I'm going to do. What am I going to do with my time? It's who am I? After I sell my business, right? You're no
Mm,
longer the CEO. Maybe you sign a 12-month consulting period, or maybe even if it's a 24-month employment agreement with the opportunity to extend. But a lot of times when somebody's run their company and they've made all the decisions and they haven't had to go to somebody else for approvals, it's hard. It's hard to work and it's hard to take direction from someone else. So a lot of times they don't want to stay, but then it's, who am I? I can tell you that, I've closed as an advisor over 60 transactions, and the emotional side is often, you underestimate the power of it. I've had three owners call me up the morning of close when the deal was done, legal agreements were in great shape. It was just the signing ceremony. We're ready to go. And them saying, hey, I can't do it. One time it was two brothers. The
Mm.
one brother wanted to sell, the other brother just did not. And he said, look, I can't do this to my brother. And what I always do is I just say, well, let's meet, let's have breakfast. And I basically said, why did you come to me? Why did you want to sell your business? To begin with, what were your objectives? Well, I wanted to diversify my estate. The business is kind of up and down, and I'm in a really good place now. I know valuations are higher, and then you say, okay, has anything changed? Is this a decision you're going to regret in a month if we end up not doing this deal? And the other thing you have to worry about is there a little bit of a stigma when people find out. A lot of times word gets out that something's going on. And if the deal doesn't close, with something wrong with the company. So I do think you need to tackle that emotional side up front. And it shouldn't be underestimated because somebody's thinking, hey, I'm not the same guy in my industry, right? I no longer have my company at the Rotary Club. People come to me for advice. I find that people underestimate the value of, hey, I went through a sale process, and you're even more of an asset and a better advisor for people. And a lot of times they do get involved in other things, and a lot of times they're back in the same industry that they left.
Yeah, it's a great point about sacrificing one's identity as a business owner. That's really closely tied, and you make another great point too when when you think about proceeds from sale. It gives entrepreneurs an opportunity to do another thing, and while they may not know exactly what that is in the moment, very often they're resourceful enough and ultimately figure it out. You've used the word valuation a couple of times, and that's a word that's near and dear to my heart, considering what I do day to day. Let's talk a little bit about valuation, but let's also talk about it in the context of the buyer universe, because I think there's a conception, right or wrong, that a strategic buyer is more likely to pay a higher valuation than a financial buyer. Why don't you touch on the differences between strategic and financial, and what's their lens on valuation?
Sounds good. In theory, a lot of times strategic players have the ability to pay more, but a lot of times it's different in reality. So unpacking that a little bit, I think when financial buyers are involved in an industry, I think one thing that really changes the valuation of a company is whether it's a platform or whether it's a tuck-in. And I'll define those terms a little bit. A platform company is a company that maybe has operations in multiple states. It's gotten to a larger scale. It has a management infrastructure. It's creating some type of economies of scale because it's got a management team, and that management team, there's some operating leverage there, and they're dropping more to the bottom line, and their margins might be a bit higher than a sole proprietorship or a smaller company. So, and the reason why I bring that up is a financial player will pay a premium if they really like an industry for a platform company that's going to be the company that they're saying, this is our model, and we're going to tuck in acquisitions, we're going to build their scale, and then we're going to have an exit plan in 5 to 7 years. So, when you think about valuation, when I think about valuation, um, I think having more than just strategic players involved is helpful. I think that, once again, we were talking about how competition makes you do things you wouldn't otherwise do, right? A strategic player who is paying maybe 6 times, 5 or 6 times for acquisitions, all of a sudden financial players come in and they start buying up companies. And now there's a really attractive asset, and you always wanted to buy that company, but you have to bid against them. Now that strategic is going to sharpen his pencil, and he's going to really go at that hard. So I do think that, once again, you would think that strategic could normally outbid financials. But remember, once a financial player has a platform, they're strategic, right? It's a combination of the two. And, they also have synergy, but they're on a compressed timeline, and they want to get there quick. So a lot of times they'll pay out more aggressively than a strategic.
Yeah, that's a great point. And getting back to the earlier part of the conversation, when business owners are approached, oftentimes it is from just folks in their own industry, and they're completely unaware that there are financial buyers who could be just as interested, if not more so, in buying the business. Continuing on the theme of valuation here, Sean, a lot of times buyers and sellers, as you well know, disagree on what the business is worth. Different perspectives on what the future looks like, sustainability of margins and expansion, and things like that. So, one of the ways that a valuation issue can be bridged is through something that you referred to before, which is the earnout. Talk a little bit about what an earnout is, how they're structured, how they're used, et cetera.
Great. So I've used earnouts extensively in my career. There are times where what the sellers is looking for in the way of purchase price and what the buyer is willing to pay, there's a gap. And an earnout can be a great way to bridge that gap. And especially when market conditions are a little bit more tumultuous than normal, or there's been a recession that's not too far in the rearview mirror. And a lot of times that's when earnouts will become much more prevalent. So they've been very prevalent, um, recently. But so what it is you set financial targets post close, and if those financial targets are achieved, and they're generally financial targets, generally, that there's additional purchase price that will be paid. And what I found is that a lot of my owner operators have been very successful with earnouts. And I think one of the reasons for that is number one, if you're dealing with a really good operator, they if they've got a target and they know there's additional purchase price, they're pretty motivated. And if they're a good operator, they can get there. The other thing is the risk isn't all theirs. They've sold their company, they've got someone else's capital, and they're probably willing to take maybe a little bit more risk that they weren't before. And I find that it's a really good formula, and a lot of my clients do max out on an earnout. But there's one thing I do want to caution people on, and that's the devil's in the details of structuring an earnout. And
Mm,
you might think, hey, this agreement is pretty clear what's going on here. We've got an EBITDA target and so forth. But a lot of crazy things happen and a lot of unexpected things happen. And don't forget that the new company might change accounting methodologies, and that could impact the earnout, right? Do you think anyone in 2019, when they put together an earnout, do you think they were thinking about a pandemic? So it's really important to have a really good relationship. Um, when you're negotiating these and negotiating good faith. And I think that one of the good things is both the seller and the buyer are on the same page. They both want the company to grow. Believe me, the buyer is not going to be upset if they have to pay out the full earnout, because that means they've achieved these financial targets and the company's going to be worth more. And but there's a lot of things that you need to think about, and there's a lot of things like acceleration clauses and clawbacks. You really want professional advice, both in the form of a legal counsel and a financial advisor, to help you through that process.
yeah, let's talk about those other advisors. That's a great segue because that's where I wanted to go next. Because a successful deal usually involves a team of advisors for the client, and obviously the key there is to have each of those advisors talking to one another, somebody quarterbacking and coordinating communication. But you alluded to legal and wealth and accounting. Anybody else that needs to be at the table to represent the client and help them through the process?
Do you know, I think the core of the team would be a legal advisor, the accountant, the investment banker or the broker, and then the wealth advisor, right? As to, okay, what does your retirement look like under this scenario? When you think about what else you could consider, you could consider a valuation expert like yourself. And some people actually go down that path because even though a lot of times the investment banker, the broker will tell you what they believe it's worth, they are invested in the deal, and they're not an independent advisor. They've got something riding on this.
Yeah.
So a lot of times an owner might say, do you know what, I want an independent third party to take a look at this, and so I'd like to go down that route. If a company's smaller and they've obviously never done a sale process, you might you might want to think about a fractional CFO that has expertise in leading companies through that process, right? To make sure that you have the resources that are necessary. So I think we talked about the core team, but they're dependent upon your individual situation. There might be additional resources you want to bring on board.
Yeah, great point about the outsourced CFO. And as you said that, I thought of one more thing in terms of relevance in the sale process, quality of earnings analysis. Something that's going to help give a buyer some comfort that the financial data that they're in receipt of uh, really is legit beyond what's stated on the paper. Talk a little bit about these quality of earnings, or Q of E as they're referred to, and who does them and how important are they to getting a deal done?
Really good topic. They're becoming more and more popular as time goes by, and I'm seeing them in the lower middle market. Right, they're moving down market. It used to be just that big companies that were going to enter into a huge transaction would do a quality of earnings, and as a matter of course. But now you're seeing them definitely in the middle market. They're very popular, and even in the lower middle market. I think whether it's something that would benefit your company, I think a couple of things you need to think about. How complex is your business? Do you have multiple divisions? I think the more complex your company, I think the more value there is in a quality of earnings, right? Um, what are the benefits of a quality of earning? It can identify red flags in your numbers, prior to going to market, right? So that's one benefit. It'll dig into variances in performance, right? That changes in performance. It'll identify those. It'll identify potential add backs, right? Perks that maybe shouldn't be in the company, or one time items that you want to identify and say, hey, this is not a recurring expense, and add that back to earnings. So there are a lot of benefits that come out of it, but I wouldn't say that you would automatically do a quality of earnings. I think it is situational, and but I do think they're becoming more and more popular. There are some other things people consider. Sometimes people now do a market study in addition to a quality of earnings, especially if there's a strong market for financial buyers and private equity has entered into the market, or you'd like to team up with a financial player and be their platform. I think a market study is another thing to consider.
Yep. Sean, we're getting close to the end here. Time does go quickly. But before we have to wrap, I want to ask you if you were on an elevator with a business owner and they asked you, like, what do other business owners do right? What do they do wrong? Any tips, best advice?
Yeah, I think that the best advice that I would give is just planning. I think a lot of times owners don't plan. And rather than proactively starting a process, they reactively start a process. And it becomes really inefficient. And Dave, you brought up a really good point about a house, right? If somebody they don't use a broker and they put their house up, people are going to walk in periodically and they're going to make an offer on the house. And you might get a great first offer, but you're thinking, well, it's the first offer. um, I'm going to sit on this. That might be the best offer you ever get, right? You just don't know, right? So I think being proactive, planning this out, don't be reactive. And a lot of times they'll have one buyer that's on a certain timeline. They have another buyer that comes into the process after the other one's further along, and they can't line those up. And they might not be the best two buyers. A lot of times, if somebody really wants to buy a company, but they're losing out on every auction because they're not valuing them fairly, they'll go out and proactively contact people, right? So sometimes there's a reason why they're proactively reaching out to you. So that's the best advice I would give is be proactive, plan it out. You'll get a great result, and a much better result at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I just want to put an exclamation mark on something you said there at the end is when you talk about there's a reason why some of these buyers are proactively reaching out and making offers. So if you can hang for just another minute, I would love to ask you specifically, you're a business owner and you get the phone call from somebody or you get the letter from somebody and they've expressed an interest in you and they're willing to pay X. You're flattered, you're surprised, you didn't see it coming. What should that buyer or that entrepreneur business owner do in that moment? What's the first thing they do and where do they go?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it depends upon mentally where they are. Let's just say they're in a position where they have no interest no interest in selling, that they believe that they can ramp the company up to another level or two. Um, in that case, I would say uh, maintain cordial relations. I don't think it's a bad thing to maintain some level of contact. Let them know you're flattered by the offer, that but the timing isn't right for you, but that you'll certainly keep them in mind when the timing is right. I think the other side of that would be, what if the timing, what if you've been thinking about it, you get approached by this party? What I would do is I would thank them and say, let me think about this, and let me sit on this a little bit. And then I would maybe reach out to an investment banker and maybe start to put together your deal team and start to talk about, is now a good time? And think about the process that we talked about. Is the market ready? Is the company ready? So where's your mindset as to what your next call would be, and how you would react to that? Are you close, or are you really far away from thinking about a transaction?
Yeah, really good stuff. And we do have to wrap here, Sean. But before we do, I want to give you the chance to tell folks out in the audience who are watching and listening, how can they reach you if they want to learn more about you, if they want to work with you, or just pick your brain on what the sale process entails?
Well, I'm at Haefele Flanagan, and my email. Should I give my email, Dave? Or
Absolutely.
my email is Sean, SEAN dot Sands at hfco.com. So really appreciate the time today, and really enjoyed the conversation, Dave.
Yeah, folks can find you on LinkedIn as well, right?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, also on LinkedIn.
Okay, definitely check him out. Sean, thanks so much for joining us today. Great conversation, and I know the audience is going to get a lot of value from that.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Dave.
It's my pleasure. And today we've been talking with Sean Sands, who's Director of Mergers and Acquisitions at Haefele Flanagan. And Haefele Flanagan is actually sponsoring today's episode. So I want to give them a big shout out and say thank you for sponsoring this episode of Behind the Numbers. As their tagline goes, they are not your typical accounting firm. They do offer really cool consulting services beyond the traditional tax and audit. They offer things like investment banking with Sean. They have a great business valuation practice, and they also do strategic consulting, executive coaching, and strategy development. So definitely check them out, hfco.com. Also want to thank you out there for watching and listening and your support of this program. Can't do it without you. If you got some value out of this program, and I know you have, please hit the share button, like, comment, review. You guys know the drill. It creates more visibility for the program, and it expands our reach to reach out to more folks in the global universe who are listening to this program. That's all we have for today, gang. My name is Dave Bookbinder. I'm known as a valuation expert. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you're a business owner and you don't know what your business is worth, whether you're thinking about selling or not, you and I should probably have a conversation. So definitely reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's it for today, gang. We will see you next time on Behind the Numbers. Take care.
Today's episode of Behind the Numbers is brought to you by Haefele Flanagan. Haefele Flanagan is a full-service accounting firm that's been serving our clients since 1967. We are not your typical accounting firm. Our services extend well beyond tax and audit to include valuation services, strategic and succession planning, leadership development, and more. When you work with Haefele Flanagan, we help you realize your long-term goals. Learn more at hfco.com or call 856-722-5300.